I just felt such a calling to help women who were experiencing a lot of the same things that I was at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, your kids are home, you're trying to teach them your nervous system. And I shipped my kids to their grandparents. And in 2 days, I recorded the whole dang thing, wrote it, recorded it, published it, and it just took off.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast. Today we have Michelle Grosser, nervous system and somatics coach. I'm so excited for this episode. You're going to love how Michelle is using private podcasts. Michelle, welcome. It is so great to have you here.
Oh my goodness. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
So let's just kick this off by maybe explaining a little bit about your business and your business model. Maybe talk a little bit about your offers or how you structured your business.
Yeah. So for the last 15 years, I was actually running a law firm as a trial attorney.
Whoa.
And then in the middle of the pandemic, not the middle, I guess right at the beginning of the pandemic, I just had this big moment where I'm burn it all down. This is too
Been there.
stressful.
Oh, yeah.
I'm done. Phone. I never wanted to do this to begin with. And I'm man, where do I go from here? And I just felt such a calling to help women who were experiencing a lot of the same things that I was at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, your kids are home, you're trying to teach them your nervous system. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I'm I'm so irritable and edgy, and I'm not sleeping well anymore. And now all these gut issues are coming out of nowhere and what have you. So I entered the world of online coaching, having no idea what I was doing. Not only that, even just being someone who was so in my, logical, analytical brain. And then all of a sudden I'm in this coaching space where I'm really working a lot with emotions and trauma and all of this stuff. So I started a podcast and it just took off. It's been so cool to watch it grow. And what was a side hustle, what started as a side hustle, just doing one-on-one coaching with moms and really helping them learn how to regulate their nervous system, has turned into my full-time career now. At the time of recording, I actually just closed my law firm last week, which is
Oh my
so
gosh.
crazy.
Oh, congratulations.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks.
How did you have it running on the side?
Which one? The
Yeah.
coaching? I was doing all of it.
Yeah, no, so pandemic, what? It probably I guess I was interpreting that it was the pandemic that you left, not just recently. Okay, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So you were running a law firm and this podcast took off over the last 4 years and you
Yes.
officially just shut it down.
Yeah,
Got it.
exactly. Yeah. I was doing it a lot as a side hustle, but it's really where my heart was, right? I think so many of us that kind of start those projects. So 2 years ago, we started a quarterly group coaching program. It's really for high achieving professional women that are wanting to learn body-based tools to regulate their nervous system for anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout. And then at the beginning of last year, I hired my first business coach and she had a private podcast. And I think you guys just recently had her on, Holly Haynes, Crush the Rush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So she has her group program in a private podcast. So that's
Mhm.
where I started to learn about it. And then she's like, you should do a lead magnet in a private podcast. And I'm like, yeah, I totally should. And I shipped my kids to their grandparents. And in 2 days, I recorded the whole dang thing, wrote it, recorded it, published it because it's so easy. And that's been my main lead magnet, I guess now for the last year, maybe year and change. Yeah, but I've loved it.
Okay.
So
I
long
need to
story
know more
short.
about the lead
Yeah, especially we
magnet.
were just coaching. We coach people probably every month on the lead magnet thing is what
Yes.
everyone's really piqued their interest on with
Mm.
private podcasting and Hello Audio. So we definitely have questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be great because there's a lot of folks that have probably heard about it. I think more and more the results speak for themselves. Like, the audio private podcast lead magnets are doing really well. They
Mhm.
are able to, if we're, architecting this conversation that does bring someone closer to that conversion point because you are building a connection. It's just easier to consume the content than most traditional launch or marketing content pieces or vehicles out there, like a webinar or a challenge or things like that. Those, not that they're bad, that sometimes it's just hard to show up, especially if they're live on a specific day and a specific time. So I'm curious if you could break down maybe how you approached like the content or the type of private podcast, how you put it out there? It sounds like the process was relatively easy for you to get from beginning to end. It sounds like in just a couple of days. So that's great to hear. But I'm curious how you decided on the content because that's a very
Mm.
common question that we get.
Yeah, so I kept it very obvious, if you will, like very clear, very simple. My group program is about healing your burnout, and my private podcast is called the Heal Your Burnout Private Podcast.
Love it.
So I didn't get clever. I didn't try to pull something out of thin air. And really, the way that it is structured. So the podcast overall, it's called The Calm Mom, right? That's my public podcast. So it's for professional women who are coming in who want solutions for their nervous system dysregulation. Number one symptom usually being burnout, overwhelm, kind of like a blend there. So I know that's what they're coming to me for. So then I just have this private podcast, Heal Your Burnout. It's 5 parts. I tell them you're already listening to podcasts, but you're listening to me now.
Yeah.
You can consume this in the pickup line while you're folding your laundry, the same way you consume my regular content. And we've all done it, right? We have like the PDFs that have sat in our inbox. We have the webinar replay links that have sat. I've done that and it just makes me feel worse. Sometimes I don't even sign up because I'm like, I'm never going to watch this. But that's not the case with this private podcast. They consume it. So I pitch it nearly every podcast episode that I do. I send them to the private podcast and I include the link. I pitch it like in my link in my social media. I pitch it where I pitch it the most, and honestly, where I find the most value for it is when I'm guesting on other podcasts. That's where I send the people as to my private podcast because then they're going to learn about my product there. They're going to learn about how I teach there. They're going to learn about how I differentiate myself from everyone else in the market there. And I just know I have them for the first like 3 episodes. I know I have them. And then maybe if they like teeter off, they've already decided, okay, I'm going to work with her, or they're just listening to my regular content coming out. But that's how I've been using it, keeping it really like simple and straightforward. This is what I want to be known for. This is what I teach. This is what you're going to get when you listen to my private podcast.
I'm curious feedback. So people
Yeah.
that have gone through it, I think you had mentioned before we started recording that you may have numbers on downloads or the people that have gone through, how many people you've had go through the lead magnet. And I'm also curious on the back end, what you're seeing as they go through the private podcast content, the quality of the lead and how much more ready they might be to take the next step with you, or their awareness level is maybe different than when they started so that it does enable them to be more open to taking that next step with your program.
Yeah, that's so good. I've had almost 3,000 people that have
Wow.
listened to the private podcast, which is awesome because I think the quality of the leads there are so much better than leads that I've gotten. I even have a quiz that performs really, really well. It converts well. I don't know if it prepares those people to
Mm,
purchase like the
that's
private
interesting.
podcast does because I have more of an opportunity to teach and indoctrinate them, I think, in the episodes of my podcast than I do with the quiz results and the landing page. So the people that have come through, I get the lead, they start listening to the first episode, and then they automatically go on to like an email nurture sequence that I have for the people that come through. So they're getting an email every day from me for the first 5 days, like, hey, episode 2, you should go back and listen now. Episode 3, this is what you're going to learn here. And in the first episode, I'm talking about burnout, but for you guys, whatever you teach, like my first episode, I am showing them how much of a problem they actually have and how much they need me. So I'm just telling them like there's 3 different stages of burnout. Let's talk about what they look like so you can figure out like, am I just tired and I need to take a nap? Or is this something that I actually need
Mm.
to hire professional help to figure out? Right. So there I'm setting the stage where they're like, okay, this is a problem. I resonate. I'm going to keep listening. And then in the last 4 episodes, so mine is 5, I walk them through why my process is the solution they've been looking for. And I give them all of the what. So, like, I walk them through my 6-step framework in those episodes. So by the time they get out of it, they're like, okay, teach me how to do this. And then there's an opportunity for them to jump on the wait list for my program. I run that program quarterly. I don't have the numbers since we started, but I know now for the one I'm going to start talking about to run in January, I have about 130 women on that wait list. So that's a pretty
Nice.
high conversion rate. Yeah, coming through. People who know exactly what they're gonna get and I think are ready to buy.
Yeah, especially when you're pre-framing the experience by talking about the frameworks that they're going to go through. And so explaining the 6 steps that you take people through, they understand the what, the process. And then I feel like once you are making the invitation to help them through it, that's the support, the guidance, all that it looks like in your group coaching program, they're just a lot more receptive because they already understand kind of in a way how it's gonna go or or the steps that are gonna be involved.
Yeah, absolutely, and just with the nature of a private podcast, I have more time with them than I would in any other outlet, right? Than I would with any other lead magnet. I've taken quizzes and it's like, "Oh, this is so interesting," and I quickly skim through. Sometimes I don't even give my email because 'cause I'm like, "I don't even know if I really how bad do I want these results," right?
Yes.
Sometimes I'm like, "What did I do?" And I get to the landing page, I'll skim through in 10 seconds, maybe,
Mhm.
look at the highlights, and then I'm like on to the next thing, or if I'm just scrolling my phone, it comes up. But with that private podcast, they really get to know me and like me and trust me. It condenses the time that it takes for them to do that because they're hearing me for 20 minutes over 5 episodes, and I'm making those actionable. So they're starting to see quick wins already. It's really hard to do that with a PDF or even like a webinar or something
Or
like that.
email.
I think
Yeah.
people are looking for something different too, right? Like, we've done the webinars, we've gone to them, like, we know what we're gonna get, and information is just so available. Like, the things I'm gonna learn
Mm.
on a webinar, I could like, ChatGPT could probably tell me a lot of those things, but if I'm gonna sit with someone and start to trust them in a private podcast, it's just different.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and you got people, I mean, there's just nothing compares to, I think, the audio habits you're already tapping into, right? So these are likely podcast listeners because they're likely coming from your show, or they're listening to someone else's show. So other people's people is a great way, right? Because they intro you and it's like
yeah,
meeting a friend through a friend, they're
Yeah.
more likely to trust. And so here you are qualifying the lead in that way. You're basically saying, cool, you like to listen to audio, like here's some more audio. And when you listen to this audio, you're probably going to listen to the next audio during that time. And there is literally nothing else out there. I listen to podcasts when I'm in the car. I listen to them when I'm getting ready if I ever have a second to myself. I listen, right? Like I listen when I'm on a walk. I have very like time. And so it's what I choose to listen to in that time, right? Like it's going to be your thing because they just downloaded it. The quiz, you brought it up because this is totally how I do it too. The person's like, "Yeah, I'm curious about that." And then but then I'm also opening other email, I'm shopping on Amazon, there's 8 tabs open like, that was something that was interesting, but then like going to the next step, such a harder sell
Yeah.
because I'm just distracted when I'm probably doing the quiz. I'm probably doing it when I shouldn't be looking at my phone. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Versus audio is this intentional time. And so you're now squeezing into this intentional time this person has already set aside. Guys, there's nothing else out there like it. I don't know how many times Nora and I can talk about it.
Yeah, for sure, I couldn't agree more. It's what I've seen, and it's like you're saying, it's how I consume content too, right? It's like we
Mhm.
look at our own patterns. Yeah, for sure.
Totally. And yeah, I want to bring up too another thing you highlighted. Like you have a successful public podcast. A lot of people are like, oh, maybe I should do that first, or like, gosh, I've always wanted one, or whatever. And what I want to point out is you actually see the greatest success from guesting on other people. So you don't have to have a public podcast to potentially benefit from an audio like consumption to another audio consumption lead magnet. Just pointing that out there too. But of course, your links on Instagram and stuff also converts people, but like those audio listeners are just like a little more highly targeted
Yeah,
from
they are.
from a perspective of if they're likely to consume it.
Mhm. Agreed, that's a great
Cool.
point.
Yeah, like I kind of want to talk about you said you have 103 people on the wait list. Like what other ways have you launched the program and like have you seen those conversions from that private podcast into dollars, I guess?
Yeah, so I've done webinars early on, really before I started doing the private podcast, and, I didn't have the same audience, so I think it's hard
Mm.
to really measure apples to apples, but the conversion rate wasn't anywhere near what I'm seeing now, and I was able to actually get away from that. So now what I'm just doing is with the women that come on my wait list through the private podcast, I'm actually just recording them like a 3-minute Loom video and sending them an email invite to the program. and
Oh,
that's selling it
nice.
out. So I'm not doing
Yeah,
any really big public facing, like,
I love
launch,
that.
whatever. I'll mention it on my public podcast if I need to even, and sometimes I'll even just mention it so people feel like they've already gotten the private invite and then they're hearing me talk about it and see what happens. But I'm able to fill my program just with private invites to the women that I've filtered through the private podcast that have then come onto my wait list.
That's really
And for
important,
me,
guys.
yeah.
That, like, high touch, especially for group programs, one-on-one coaching, that intimate connection in DMs. I mean, there's nothing like getting that message from, like, somebody you look up to or you've been listening to for a long time also. You're like, "Oh, she sees me like I'm a real person." That's huge, and, like, Pat Flynn has always said this. He's always had a very popular podcast for a really long time, and he dedicates every week time to personally DMing people who are sharing his show. He can't do everyone, but he's like, that stuff, yeah, it's not scalable. People are trying to do it with like automatic, whatever. It's not the same. And he always reiterates that like personal connection, like never lose that, even at
Mhm.
scale, to
Mhm.
focus on it. So that's going to help your conversions a ton. So, like the automation piece, I think audio really helps that intimate, like, connection. I think it what's the word? Like removes some of that barrier and that wall that can happen or feel like I think that can happen with email or like other types of content.
Yeah, it's more
Audio
intimate,
really makes
right?
the person,
Like,
yeah, it's
yeah,
more intimate. So it
yeah,
really matches well with that high touch connection based marketing that you're talking about. So I love that.
yeah, and different, I mean, to each his own, right? But where
Mhm.
I'm at in my season of life, I have a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old. I homeschool them. I am
Mm,
not like, I don't wanna spend a ton of time in the DMs. I don't wanna
no,
be doing,
fair.
right? Like, maybe I will at some point do some big launch, but whatever. But if I can sell out my program right now with to a list of women who want it because they've already been through my private podcast, and I can just reach out to them, which I wanna be doing, right? Like, I wanna be getting to know
Mhm.
them. I think is it's just so much easier and better for my nervous system, frankly.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, have you had any of the moms that have gone through the private podcasts send you messages about it? Any feedback? Because I'm assuming maybe, at least for some of them, a private podcast is probably new, or it's probably, even if they do listen to your public show, a private podcast is, like we said, if they were looking for something different, it may not be something they've seen before. So they may not have consumed this type of content, which we might is like the lead magnet content, but they, to get to know you in this way, they might already be used to like with the webinars and some of the traditional stuff. So I'm curious if you had any feedback from any of your listeners.
Yeah, so I've gotten it's interesting actually. I don't get a lot of feedback about, like, how to access the show or questions like that, which I noted too, because at first I'm like, "Oh, man, are people is this gonna be, like, one more thing of people reaching out and being like, 'I clicked the link and I couldn't access the private podcast.'" And I'm like, "I don't have time for that either." I haven't had any of that, which has been awesome. I have gotten feedback about the content initially, that first episode about how burnt out am I, where people are like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize how serious this actually is," which is awesome. That opens up, right, a conversation that I get to have with them. And then the other type of feedback that I get is that will be like a great gateway for them to start asking questions about the program. So they're like,
Mhm.
"I'm on episode 3. I know I haven't gotten to the end yet, but like when is the next one? I'm on the wait list. Like, how am I going to know? Am I going to get an email?" And then again, that opens up the whole conversation. So when I send them that private invite in a few weeks or whenever it is, I can refer back and be like, "Hey, it's so good to talk to you again. I know you've been waiting for this. Here's a private link. You can jump in early, save your spot before we fill up." And then that just feels more like a continuation of where we were instead of trying to reach out to this like warm, hopefully warm lead, right? And just be like, "Hey, I'm here again. Buy something," right?
Yeah. This, doesn't s it's evergreen in that you're pushing people to a wait list, but you run the programs live. Is that true?
Yeah, so I run them quarterly live. Yeah.
Quarterly, that's what you said.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, have you thought about turning things evergreen? We hear a lot of people talking about what that looks like. Maybe not. Maybe this is totally like how you wanna do it, but I'm curious, like,
Mhm.
maybe where you're thinking of taking some private podcasts, if you have some ideas of ones you haven't launched, what you're thinking of doing with the program, your thoughts around, like, where it is now and what it could be.
Yeah.
Anything you wanna share there?
I'm thinking about turning parts of it evergreen. A lot of what I teach is it's somatic body-based tools to regulate your nervous system. So I want to be able to teach a lot of these like breathwork sessions and somatic flows and things like that live. I just think
Mm.
there's a different energy to that. I think a lot of the curriculum is recorded already, and that could go evergreen. What I really wanna start playing around with is how I respond to Q&As, and I'm thinking about doing that in a private podcast because I think it's easier to search. I think I can give a more thoughtful response. I can answer something, and it's easy for people to go kind of through it. They could even check it weekly and be like, "Oh, I didn't even think to ask that question. That's such a great question. Here's, a 3-minute response from Michelle," and they can listen to it instead of like having to do a Q&A call, like somewhere where people could just submit their Qs and I would answer them in A's in a private podcast for that cohort of the program. So that's something that I'm wanting to play around with too.
I love that. Have you listened to Mariah Caz's episode?
No.
Oh, I thought
Is that
that's
what
where
she does?
Yes. Okay, so that's your homework. I don't know what episode number it is, but it's in the middle of Hello Audios or Lunch or Private podcast. So look for Mariah Cause on the Lunch or Private podcast. She has done it. And so she will have some tips on exactly how she does
Awesome.
it. She's been teaching her body of work for a really long time. So she found herself just not wanting to commit to these Q&A calls. And she also felt like it was, yeah, like arguably a waste of time for the people coming in some respects
Yeah.
because she's like, it could just be so much more efficient. And she didn't use that language, but in that episode, we talk about what some of the people who were signing up for the program thought about not having Q&A calls. A lot of people feel like they need that FaceTime. And so she dives deep there and gives us the real behind the scenes and of how she's executing it, like how she has people submit questions, how it makes them feel. And yeah, I think she's like 80 plus episodes in. Now she's even thinking of selling that by itself because it's kind of become its own body of work. And that was how she looked at it. I'm investing all this time. I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours on these calls with people. Like, I want them to be able to access it. I don't want it buried in a Zoom call, in a transcript, in a learning management site, because do people actually download it and do anything with it? Like, the pretty resounding answer is no. We like to think they do as the
Yeah.
creator, as the teacher, like, well, I'm giving them it. They can have access. It's like, yeah, but is it in the most accessible way? Like, you can give them access, but is it accessible? And I think that's the big thing. So I love that you're thinking that. And we're having people starting to experiment. Even us, we're like thinking, do we have a Q&A podcast with the most typical questions that we
Mhm.
get from Hello Audio? And, do we put it public or do we like put it in, yeah, even us, like someone who runs this software is playing with those kind of ideas. So
I
letting
love
you
that.
know that there are some people who've taken that path.
Yeah. And even just like answering the same things over and over,
I
right? It's
know.
like the efficiency on my end too. Like, yes, for the customer, I want them to be able to access this in a
Of
way that feels
course.
accessible and useful. But then for myself too, it's a lot of times we're answering the same thing. So to have that bank
Yeah.
is okay. I'm gonna go listen to that. Thank you.
Yeah, because she even talks about how she frames the question when she gets it to because hers is very my business, right? And I'm sure with your
Yeah.
women, it's very my life is this is happening in my life right now. And
Yeah.
it's all unique, right? We all have these unique experiences, but can you consolidate it and get it down to something that's universal? And she talks about how she thinks about that and also how she tells her people too, like, you know, I think that's the reason why we do the Q&A calls, right? As a coach, as a teacher, it's like, if you can show up and you watch another woman or person ask a question that you didn't even know you had, that feels good. So we know there's value in it. But then does that value have to be where you dedicate your time to sit in front of a laptop? Or can that value be something that is more accessible? And I think that's what we play with in her episode. So yeah, there's people starting to take that plunge is kind of getting rid of it. And actually, there was a little pushback initially, but once she did it and they realized how much value was in that podcast, they're like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And it's such a relief that I don't have to show up to these calls. I mean,
Yeah, right.
right? Goes both ways. It's not just on the teacher not having to schedule the calls.
Oh,
So, anyways, some of the insights that we got from her doing that.
that's awesome. I love all of that.
Yeah.
I'm curious that so there's always those that's one I think great like you have this idea that the feed that you're sitting on. Do you have any other ideas for feeds that maybe you've been sitting on or that you've been thinking about or have you thought about going back and are you looking at making any changes to your lead magnet? It could just be, enhancing the ones you already have. I'm just curious. Sometimes when you get started with private podcasts, it's like Pringles, right? You just can't eat one. Is that, or is it, I don't even know. Is that
Not the
the,
fake Pringles that you were eating
not the
yesterday,
fake
right, Lauren?
Pringles? No, that
They're
was
not
not
as
a good idea. That was not.
All
I
the moms
regret
know
that
that one,
choice.
that's the special healthy one, and you're like, "It's not the same."
That's just not the same. Yeah, it's not the same. But no, but I'm curious because I know for us, it's just like once you start, you just can't stop. And then you have a bazillion ideas and then you have more ideas than time. So that's just kind of how that's our experience anyway.
Yep. So I think, yes, as part of my group program, there is a library of somatic playlists. So that's something also like meditations, or some of it require, I think, a video element, but for the most part, especially the meditations, right? Or a lot of the breathwork ones. So that's something else too that I'm playing around with. Like, could I deliver those via private podcast? I
Mm.
think they would be easier to access on the go when you're not sitting and have the platform in front of you, or like, if you want to listen to meditation before you're going to go to bed or you're in the bath or whatever, it's so much easier to have your phone, have your podcast platform, hit play where you're going to listen to something anyway than it would be to like grab your whatever, log into Kajabi, go to the module, find the playlist. So just the
I usually
audio
have a
thing.
lost password involved that I have
Right.
to recover,
Yeah,
like, it's
same.
never
Then I've
it's never
reset
that
10
simple.
times and still
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
remember it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, which is the opposite of what you wanna be searching for when you're trying
Mhm.
to relax, right, before bed. Yeah, so delivering that via private podcast, I think would work really well too, and again, I think it's searchable in a different way. If people are searching, sleep, or they're searching, "I'm feeling overwhelmed," or "I'm feeling angry," or whatever, I could organize it
Mm.
in a way that it's quick access for what they need, and then they can have
I'm feeling
there's
membership vibes here.
Yeah, me too.
I bet you've been thinking about it, right?
What's that?
I bet you've been thinking about it, I can tell.
I've been thinking about it. I just made a cross country move and closed the law firm and
Mm.
started homeschooling, so I'm like,
So
enough
it's a
for
lot.
now.
Yeah,
Let's
Fair.
your
just
business is working, don't
enough
worry
for
about it.
now. But yeah, for sure. I hear that too.
I like that. I like the idea of being able to just, because I mean, I have specific apps I'll use for meditations, and I have very specific ways I will use meditations, like a morning meditation
Mhm,
or
mhm.
a sleep meditation. And I feel like
Don't
going
kill your
to,
fellow band
yeah,
member. Just kidding.
that's, yeah,
Very
how do, yeah.
nuanced, Nora.
But this is how we survive. This is how we
Yes.
survive band season is exactly this. Those meditations, there's a few that are my go-tos but it's not always easy to find. And if they were
Yeah.
Mhm.
just in the playlist with that specific thing, like there's some acceptance and some patience meditations that I've been leaning into recently, right? But
Yep.
I think especially for your audience that are so busy and time is so precious and time to themselves is so precious, time at all. I feel like making it easier for them to navigate and get the tools and resources that they'll use to get the
Yep.
results that they want, I think is really important. So I absolutely see that being very valuable. And to Lindsay's point, down the road, when you have more capacity, to maybe consider that I think that could be a membership model that I think a lot of women would pay for because of the convenience factor.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I agree. And then the other thing too is I think it also makes it so easy to take. Like my public podcast, we just published on Tuesday our 300th episode. So there's a
Wow,
ton of
congrats.
Oh,
content
congrats.
there where I can pull really targeted interviews or things that, right, are like so aligned with what's going on in my private world in my coaching program, and then just drop those as a private feed for my people too, where it's like, hey, listen to this because we're talking about boundaries this week, or we're talking about emotional
Mm,
expression. Like, this is something you need to listen to. Instead of just sending that generic link, it feels more cohesive, right? To have it in like a
mm.
private feed.
Yeah, we're talking about doing that with Hello Audio
Same.
or with
Yeah.
Launch Your
Okay.
Private Podcast because we have such topics. I want to do a lead magnet. Like, where are all the episodes that are lead magnets? And then
Yeah.
we can turn that into an asset, demonstrate how people are using private podcasts with public podcast. Go further than here's a link to a Spotify playlist because not everyone uses Spotify, but like
Yeah.
let them have the playlist of this is what I need right now by topic. And you have 300 episodes, so I'm sure you have a lot. And I
Uh,
think that's a great way to kind of marry the public and the private and to add some variety to like, yeah, your calls to action. Like instead of just that one podcast, we have now maybe someone's not ready yet for that, but they're looking in to answer some problem that they have. Right. So I think that's
yeah.
a super great idea.
Yeah, I think for the group program and also like you're saying, 300 I mean, there's
Hmm.
people out there that have, triple that, but it's just like it can be overwhelming
It's a lot.
because you come
Hmm.
in and it's, "Oh, where do I start?" And the beginning episodes are very different than the episodes now. Even my content has just evolved
Hmm.
in a few years. So to be able to have a playlist where it's come here if you want to talk specifically about anxiety, right? And here's a 10 whatever episode private feed. Come here if it's about overwhelm, burnout, whatever,
Mm.
what have you. I could see that being really helpful too.
Yeah, and then, hey, join my membership and you can have access to just throwing it out there. No, and now you're making me think of Robin's episode, which was a very
Oh, yeah.
early Launch a Private podcast. She has a Start Here episode. She's similar. She deals with
Okay.
parents. I can't remember exactly because so I don't want to mess it up, but she deals with parents of difficult kids in a difficult situation. I don't remember exactly the situation, but a lot of content. Parents are overwhelmed, wanting answers, wanting to help their kids. And she has a Start Here podcast that's at the top banner. That's some of it is, yeah, from the public podcast, like her top episode. She just found herself answering that question a lot and decided to basically make a feed that answers that question in particular with episodes she already has. So there you go. There's another idea. I got one
Brilliant.
more for you if you're open to it.
Yes.
How are
We
you
can't help
using
ourselves.
how are you using testimonials in your lead magnet for the program?
Hmm.
Are you?
Testimonials that I'm taking from my program and putting it into my private
The lead
podcast.
magnet.
Yeah, that's good. So I started the private podcast before the group program was
Oh, yeah.
really up and running. So I
Mhm.
haven't put anything, but I know Holly does. And I've actually gone
Mhm.
back and like she has specific episodes. So I'm collecting testimonials and you've like
Nice.
just added something for me to put on my to-do list to just, and I've recorded my testimonials on Zoom actually. So I can pull that
Nice.
audio and go drop it right in at the end of my 5-part series. So yeah, I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome. You
We're
can
very
even
good at
sprinkle
adding
some of the
things.
juicy stuff
Yeah.
in the episodes themselves as well. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It's true. Yeah, we're good at adding things to the to-do list. We
Yes,
really
we
can.
are.
Like,
We
you
are the
see our
pros.
to-do
I
list. It's
know.
insane. Yeah.
So good. Getting
If
private
only,
coaching.
yeah, that and it makes us overwhelmed because it gives us ideas for our business. So don't worry, you are as
Yeah,
overwhelmed as
same.
us.
Yep.
We have like 3
Um,
feeds that we are supposed to be launching too. So there you go.
Like in the next 30 days. Yeah, it's fine.
it's fine with the band
Yeah,
camp,
it's
whatever.
fine. Just gotta get
Yeah,
past the
it's
next
fine.
4 days. It's
There you
totally
go.
fine. Yeah. And sleep a little. But yes, I'm in that category of needs nap. Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Hopefully. You might
yeah,
need to
just
listen
go
to that
raw.
episode. Let's see.
I should, everybody, yeah.
Me too.
In the
Me
link,
too.
the link to that, her private podcast will be below. So make sure you
Mhm.
check that out. I know I will. Yeah. Besides me carrying around a sign all day that just says like needs nap, and hopefully people will understand. So no, it'll be good. No, I'm excited. I'm so excited that you shared all of this. I'm just thrilled that we've got not only just the impact that you're making. I mean, obviously this is very important work, and your audience, the fact that they're consuming it, and then more women are able to go into your group coaching program and getting on the wait list, and you're able to make stronger connections, and those connections will lead to better results in those programs. I think is really important. So that's really cool.
Yeah. I'm just grateful for the platform. It's been so fun to use. I think that's it. The
Good.
best way to, right? It's a way to be creative in delivering this information in a way that people want to consume it. I think we just showed in the last 20 minutes that the opportunity and the ways to use it are like endless. There's so many different things. But it's been so easy to put together. That was shocking to me and then so fun to deliver. So thanks.
Yeah, no one says webinars are fun. They're kind of fun. They have their moments, but not leading up to them, right? Like I get in the zone when I'm like on it, but like fun is not a word I would use to describe webinars.
No, not so much.
Excuse me.
No, guarded.
Came out all
I think
creepy. I was like,
guarded.
webinars, and then it turned to a cough.
That's how they feel though sometimes. So you're
Yeah, I
fine.
know,
You're
right?
fine. It's on brand. It's fine.
Perfect.
Awesome.
my
Well,
goodness.
thanks for hanging out with us. Our final question that we ask every person who comes on the show: if you had a private podcast of your life's musings, what would it be called?
Oh my gosh, my life's musings. I think a name that I've toyed around with is Out of Our Mind. And I think because a lot of the work that I teach is how to get like out of your mind and into your body, out of your head and into your body. So I think that might be apropos. You might want to
like
get out of my mind and you might also think I'm out of my mind.
Correct, right?
It's perfect.
All of it.
I think it's
Yeah.
perfect. I love that. Looking forward to it when we can subscribe.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
for having
Michelle,
me.
for
It's
coming
been
and
great.
hanging out and sharing all of that with us. That was really great.
My pleasure.
And
There you have it, audio heads. Another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast is in the books. I hope you're leaving today feeling even more ready to amplify your voice and connect with your audience in meaningful ways. The adventure continues in our next episode with even more insights, strategies, and inspiration to help you along your own private podcasting journey. Of course, make sure to check out helloaudio.fm to start your own private podcast. And remember, you've got amazing content that needs to be heard, so let's turn the volume up. Until next time.